Welcome to Thursday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live here on Giants.com as well as the mobile app. He's Jonathan Casillas. I'm Lance Medow with you for the next 60 minutes in multiple ways. You can interact with us here on the program. You give us a ring, 201-939-4513. Can't get to the phone, not a problem. You could hit us up on Twitter, hashtag Giants Chat. And as a reminder, you can find the archive of this show and our entire podcast network on the Giants mobile app, podcast platforms everywhere, and at Giants.com/podcast. So we are continuing our opponent preview series today, turning our attention to the New England Patriots. Week 12, Sunday, November 26th. The Giants will host the Patriots at MetLife Stadium, a 1 p.m. Eastern kickoff, and it's going to be some interesting race in the AFC East this season, given the arrival of Aaron Rodgers, and the Patriots looking to bounce back because they made some tweaks on their coaching staff. And to get more into that, we're now joined by a man who has been all over the Patriots, even when Jonathan Casillas briefly suited up for them in 2014. That is none other than ESPN NFL Nation reporter Mike Reiss. Mike, you got Lance Medow, Jonathan Casillas here on Giants.com. Big Blue Kickoff Live. Hope all is well. How's everything on your end?
Doing great, Lance. Doing great, Jonathan. I was just looking at it. It's so great that you mentioned it, Lance. It was October 28th. 2014.
There you go.
When the Patriots acquired Jonathan and a 2015 sixth-round pick from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for a 2015 fifth-round pick. They went on to win the Super Bowl that year. It was like it was one of those like in-season trades that just gave the team a little bit of the boost it needed. So great to connect with you again, Jonathan, and always great to talk with you, Lance.
Same here, Mike. Thank you, brother.
Well, and Mike, I'm glad you brought that up because we've been hearing from Jonathan nonstop that Tom Brady has one less Super Bowl ring if they don't make that trade in the middle of the season. So I'm glad you clarified all of that.
I truly believe that, too. I truly believe that.
Confirmed.
Yes, 100%.
There you go.
Yeah, Brady was very much on the fence. In confidence, though, he is at least
I heard he's the one that made the phone call. That's what I heard. Mike, I might be wrong, but that's what I heard.
It wasn't Bill. It was Tom. Yeah, 100%. Yes. Well, let's return to planet Earth here on this program as we focus on the current Patriots. And Mike, probably the biggest storyline is the change at offensive coordinator after the merry-go-round last season, a variety of different voices. Bill O'Brien clearly has a history with Mac Jones going back to their Alabama days. From a big-picture perspective, how much does this change the stability, at least, on the offensive side of the ball?
Lance, I think it's significant, and I guess I'd use the Trevor Lawrence example. I think what we saw from him in Jacksonville last year when he had Doug Peterson versus the year before with Urban Meyer, we saw the improvement, from Trevor Lawrence. And I believe, everything I've learned about football from covering it over the years, that I'm not saying we'll see like the same exact improvement or, comparing Mac to Trevor, but I just feel like the structure, the experience of Bill O'Brien, it's going to be such a dramatic improvement, from a coaching standpoint, that I would be shocked if Mac Jones doesn't have a better season this year than he did last year.
Yeah, he did regress a little bit last year, and people talk about the talent at the wide receiver position over there for New England, but that uncertainty at that offensive coordinator, and I wouldn't say uncertainty, but just maybe not the right guy, maybe. Maybe that's the right terminology to use. Mike, don't get me killed over there in New England. But, having somebody like Bill O'Brien who's worked with great quarterbacks before, led teams before, and I think flourished at the offensive coordinator position, I think that bodes very well for Mac Jones and having a bounce-back year because he did have a great rookie year where he was a Pro Bowl alternate, ended up slipping into the Pro Bowl, hitting the gritty on the Pro Bowl field, which was great. And then I did see a little regression last year, but he didn't look too far different than he did his rookie year. So I expect him to bounce back. What do you think?
Well, so I think so. And I think a couple key points, Jonathan, is the offense that Bill O'Brien's bringing in is really the offense that Mac ran as a rookie under Josh McDaniels, who was the coordinator then. Because you go back to, Bill O'Brien first coming into the NFL, he came in under Josh McDaniels, here in New England. So I think that will help Mac. And I guess I would tell you guys, I was at every spring practice this year, and just watching Mac, he was so much more at ease this year compared to last year. And I interpreted that as his confidence in what they're doing. He feels, in my view, better with what they're doing offensively this year than they were at this point last year.
And, Mike, I think the Trevor Lawrence, Doug Peterson connection is a great example because we saw when you have also Doug, who played the position, working with a young quarterback, it could do wonders. Not to say that Bill O'Brien was an accomplished quarterback like Doug Peterson, but that relationship did move that immensely in the right direction compared to where Trevor was as a rookie. But as you could attest to, it also is dependent on the talent around the quarterback. It's not just necessarily the play caller. They bring in Juju Smith-Schuster to add a veteran wide receiver, but I also think they're looking to see if these young nucleus of players at the receiver position could take the next step forward. Specifically, I want to focus on Tyquan Thornton, who spent most of the season in the early stages on the sideline due to that clavicle injury, and then we saw some flashes in the latter part of the year. How much more can they get out of him, and how maybe key is he more so than some of these other veterans in the fold?
So I think Tyquan Thornton is a key for them. You go back to last year, they traded up for him in the second round, drafted him 50th overall out of Baylor. And basically what they said, this is Matt Groh, their director of player personnel, said, you want to get faster? You got to draft fast players. And Tyquan Thornton ran a 4.27 40, in coming out in the draft that year. And they picked him right before the Steelers picked George Pickens, right before the Colts picked Alec Pierce, right before the Chiefs picked Sky Moore. So there was a little run at receiver in the second round. And, you make that investment, Lance, you want to see the returns. And so I think a fast guy like that who can shake free, also in the red zone, more than just a straight-line guy, they do need to see that along with Juju Smith-Schuster, along with Devontae Parker, along with Kendrick Bourne, and maybe, along with DeAndre Hopkins, depending on how that situation unfolds.
Okay, so we're going to stick with the wide receiver, and you talked about the addition of Juju Smith-Schuster, who is now Super Bowl champion, a veteran wide receiver. But I don't think he's never really been a wide receiver number one. When I look at the roster for the Patriots and I look at all of the guys, Devontae Parker, I think, he was kind of the consensus number one. Kendrick Bourne kind of being a number two guy. I don't really see none of those guys being, like you mentioned, a DeAndre Hopkins, a guy who is unanimously a number one receiver that demands a double team on certain downs and situations and in red zones. Who do you think is going to emerge out of this group of wide receivers as the number one wide receiver for the New England Patriots?
I'm not sure that they're going to have one, Jonathan. And I think I'm going to give you an analogy going back to 2014 when you came to the Patriots. It was Julian Edelman, Brandon LaFell, Danny Amendola. I guess you'd call Julian the number one, but really, if you're a defense, are you really saying that's we got a game plan around? To me, when you talk about number one receiver, I'm thinking the game plan almost is centered around taking that guy out as much as you can. They sort of never really had a number one other than Randy Moss, going back to 2007 when they had the record-breaking season. So to me, this has always been about the totality of their offensive pass catchers, and I'd include the tight ends, Mike Gesicki, Hunter Henry in there, than really having that top-tier guy.
That was the next thing I was going to go to. You're talking about 2014, and this is the years of Gronk. Gronk is the number one receiver for this Patriot offense for the last, I don't know how long that Gronk actually played for the New England Patriots, but he was the number one. And you talk about Hunter Henry and the addition of Gesicki as well. Those guys aren't Gronkowski. Those guys aren't going to demand as much attention and in the red zone as much as Gronk did and be that physical force, that physical brute force that Gronk was for all the years that he played with Bill Belichick and Tom Brady. How do we figure out offensively for the Patriots, I guess, figuring out this passing game? Because Gesicki took a step back last year compared to the year he had prior to that in Miami.
I think it's a great point that you made. And it actually made me miss Gronk, just two reasons, Jonathan. One, watching him play, right? Because it was just you don't see that. And two, just the personality. He was so fun to be around, as you can attest to from your time here. I think Gesicki's like another receiver. So look, a lot of empty sets, a lot of spread the field, let Mack at quarterback, sort of read the defense, get the ball out quick. And I think Hunter Henry, probably more your traditional combination tight end. But you're right. Like, I would never compare either of those guys to Gronk. And I think your point that Gronk was sort of the centerpiece of those offenses is really, really well said.
And Gesicki could turn out to be one of the best value additions for them, depending on how they utilize him, because as Jonathan mentioned, Dolphins didn't take advantage of him, but it's understandable when you have a Tyreek Hill and a Jalen Waddle in the equation. Mike, he doesn't have nearly as much competition here in New England, so that could very well bode well for him. But all of the offensive success, or the lack thereof, to me, always comes back, Mike, to the trenches. And there's been a lot of talk, as you can attest to, in New England, that they didn't make any move at the tackle position this offseason. They still have Trent Brown and, of course, Riley Reiff, the veteran. And Brown had a down year last year, and there was talk about this spring. He didn't look as animated, questions about work ethic. Big picture perspective here, Mike, how concerning is the tackle position overall entering this season?
To me, Lance, it would be the number one thing that I'll be looking for as a reporter covering the team. Now, I would say they've won with similar level talent in the past, but then I'll catch myself and say, well, when Tom Brady's the quarterback, like you know what I mean? There's
Sure.
a leveling there, right?
Yep.
So I got to watch it. They drafted 3 offensive linemen in the 4th round this year that might have to play sooner, possibly than they would have anticipated. I do think, and I'm giving a lot here in one answer, I do think the offensive system and the new offensive line coach they have, Adrian Clem, should help, but ultimately it comes down to the players, right? And I want to see if they have enough. I think it's a very fair question.
And looking at the O-line with Trent Brown, who I think is a stalwart, one healthy, that's a big, win, big if, right? Cole Strange, David Andrews, and Mike Onwenu, how you say his name?
Yep,
I'll be butchering these names.
Well, you were on the money, as Mike told you, yeah.
I guess, and you got the additions and then also the right tackle as well. Who do you expect to take the biggest jump this year moving forward? Because the offensive line position, and we talk about it here in this building, is paramount to our offensive success. I think the camaraderie there, the unity there, and the emergent leader. We have a stalwart here in our left tackle and Andrew Thomas. And I guess who's the guy that, when you look at the offensive line, who's the guy that you can lean on? And I guess there's another question too, 2 questions. Who's the guy you can lean on? Who's the bell cow of that position? And also, who do you expect to take a big step forward this year?
So, and just, Jonathan, to fill it out, they signed Riley Reiff, the veteran offensive tackle, who probably will start at right tackle. The question to me is at left tackle, is Trent Brown going to be there? He was not. He wasn't here for the first day of mandatory minicamp in the spring. He had shown up, I was told, for some of the first days of voluntary work, and then was gone. And so that situation I'm keeping an eye on as a reporter, because the backup there, his name is Calvin Anderson, a 5th-year pro who has maybe a dozen starts to his name in the NFL. So that just sort of fill in the picture. I think the one player I would mention is Cole Strange, the left guard, was their first-round pick last year. I'm going to relate it to the Giants. When Andrew Thomas was drafted in the 1st round in 2020, he had his rookie year, and then you hope he takes that next step in 2021. Evan Neal, drafted in the 1st round in 2022, plays. You hope he's taking that next step this year, right? I mean, you make these big investments. Same thing with Cole Strange.
Yep.
We're talking with Mike Reiss, ESPN NFL Nation reporter, covers the Patriots as we look ahead to the Week 12 matchup between the Giants and the Patriots. Mike, before we transition to defense, when you look at the makeup of this team, clearly they struggled on the offensive side of the ball last year, and we talked about the depth of the AFC East. Aaron Rodgers, you'd expect him to improve the Jets. The Bills and the Dolphins have been fairly steady. How much do you think the philosophy for New England, regardless of the impact Bill O'Brien makes on Mac Jones, is we are going to steer this philosophy more towards slowing down the opponents in our division with our defense and alleviating the stress on our offense, as opposed to we need to get into a back-and-forth offensive clinic battle with our divisional foes?
So, Lance, I do think there is something to that. However, and I'm going to see if I hit this right, because it might put Jonathan right back in the team meeting room Wednesday at 8 a.m. with Bill Belichick up in the front of the room. We're going to play complementary football. We're going to have our offense complementing our defense, complementing our special teams. So we're going to have physical special teams. Remember, the last time we saw the Patriots last season, they gave up 2 kickoff returns for touchdowns in a game they had to win in Buffalo to make it to the playoffs. Their special teams were not up to the level that they have traditionally been under Bill Belichick. So I think, Lance, I would focus more on the idea of let's get the special teams back up. Let's keep the defense at the level it was for the better part of last year. And then if the offense comes up like they project it will, it's all 3 of them tied together that make them a team that can compete in a much improved AFC East.
Mike, I'm going to stick with the defense, but I'm definitely going to come back to that special teams, conversation.
Yeah.
But I look at the defense, and I look at Matthew Judon and everything that he's done the last few years. I don't really expect him to have another year where he's putting up 15 and a half sacks, That's very hard to do, and I expect that number to maybe stay the same, but at least, maybe be double digits, but maybe not 15 and a half. If he doesn't produce the way he did last year, and you have Ocho, is that the other? Uche. Yeah. I'm telling you, man, I'm butchering these names.
Well, we at least can identify the players.
You know what I'm talking about, right? You know what I'm talking about. And I love the way he played. He didn't play as much as Matthew Judon, but I felt like he was a contributor. He was a very high productivity guy whenever he was in and playing. If Matthew Judon doesn't put up those numbers, who else you expect along that defensive front to, I guess, get in that backfield and cause some havoc in this explosive, ridden AFC East offensive, cohort that you guys have over there?
Totally. So I think the one guy that if things go according to the way the Patriots hope they might, it would be Christian Barmore, a third-year defensive tackle out of Alabama that they had picked in the second round 3 years ago. I mean, just from a pure talent standpoint, Jonathan, he's got it all. He's just got to stay on the field and just sort of stay locked in. Talent-wise, clearly was like a first-round pick, if not for some other questions, coming out of the draft a couple years ago. The point that I would want to just sort of highlight for the Patriots on defense, every single player from last year, other than Devin McCourty, your former teammate, the safety and longtime captain, returns. So from playing much better. I mean, I can just more say it as a reporter, but you can speak to this. When you bring back almost your whole defense from one year to the next, you're starting at such a higher point, just in terms of how you communicate with your fellow linebacker, what you're implementing on defense. So they were pretty good last year on defense, Jonathan. And now to think that they are just going to build from that point with a first-round cornerback in Christian Gonzalez that they drafted, second-round pick Keon White, sort of a defensive lineman, outside linebacker, and then a third-rounder, Marte Mapu, sort of a hybrid safety linebacker out of Sacramento State. So the defense, they feel like, has the pieces and the retention to possibly do some special things.
Yeah, continuity definitely in their favor, Mike, to your point. You don't see many defenses have the luxury of bringing back all that talent. You brought up Christian Gonzalez, and could turn out to be one of the steals of the first round because he fell to the Patriots. What I think Gonzalez brings to the table, Mike, and I'm curious your perspective, the cornerbacks in general are small in stature. That doesn't mean they're not effective, but Gonzalez at least gives them maybe a little bit more size that had been lacking that group. How critical is that additional size considering what they're going up against within the division from a wide receiver standpoint?
Well, I think that's a great point, Lance, and it's something that Gerard Mayo, their assistant coach, one of their top assistant coaches on defense, mentioned, after they picked Gonzalez. I'll just give you the tail of the tape. I mean, they put him on the roster at 6'2", 201 pounds, and he runs really well. You look at their other corners, Jonathan Jones, a veteran, 5'10", 190. Marcus Jones, the electric third-round pick from last year, 5'8", 175. Jack Jones, another second-year corner who's got some issues legally off the field that everyone's aware of, 5'11", 175. So those are, to me, your top four corners, and Gonzalez stands out, from that sort of physical makeup standpoint. And
you talked about Devin, who's my guy. I've known Devin for a very long time. We played in the Governor's Bowl together here in New Jersey versus New York.
There you go.
Way back when, But, he's a guy who was, undoubtedly the leader of that defense for a very long time in the New England Patriots, no matter who was the defensive coordinator for that team. And you take a guy like that. Yes, the continuity is there, the camaraderie is there. That's something that we talk about a lot with the Giants, returning both Mike Kafka and Wink Martindale as well. So I definitely see that. But when you lose somebody like that, a leader, not only a leader and a locker room guy, a glue guy, but also one of the biggest playmakers in the NFL at that position, I think it might be a little bit of a drop-off. And I'm all for the going into a second year. Like, for me, that first year is always like, man, we got to learn. We got to get through this year learning with these, through fire. You learn through fire in the league. You can't put together enough plays in training camp to get ready for the season. Just not possible. So you learn. But with that subtraction of Devin McCourty being the player that he was and the leader that he was, who on that back end is going to step up and be that guy? Because I think every defense needs that guy. Yes, you need a pass rusher. Yes, you need somebody that's going to be able to stop the run. But you also need somebody on the back end that's communicating to the front seven and also the back guys as well.
So this is a great point and really falls right in your wheelhouse from your playing career. So I asked that exact question to Gerard Mayo, the assistant coach, back in April. And he said that Jawan Bentley, their sort of middle linebacker, is going to take some of that away from Devin. So, and almost he related it back, Mayo related it back to his career, said, look, when I played, that was me, and then as I sort of retired, faded off, it became Devin, and now almost it's coming back to that position that Mayo had played where Bentley is, sort of that glue guy in the middle of the defense, like you said, to position, the guys up front, to talk to the guys in the back. To me, Jonathan, like, I look at it more like, okay, if it's going to be Bentley, who's that safety back in like center field that's making sure your corners, that you can see everything in front of you is basically what I'm trying to say. I don't want to talk outside my lane here. I've never played at the NFL level, but you know what I mean. I think it's a good point, and it's something they're going to have to work through a little bit here in training camp.
Mike, you brought up special teams earlier and mentioned that they have some cleaning up to do after last season's results. Interestingly, the Patriots drafted both a kicker and a punter in this year's draft, in the 4th round and the 6th round. And Nick Folk is still on the roster, who'd been an established veteran kicker on the roster for the last several years. I guess two-parter for you. Number one, how open is this kicking competition as they get set for training camp? And not to say that two rookies can't coexist and function on their own islands, but do you feel Bill Belichick is more than comfortable relying on a pair of rookies in two very important positions that you attested to get overlooked?
Totally, Lance. I mean, so I do think he will have the confidence as long as the rookies, how do I say this? I'm thinking Mike Tomlin. Didn't Mike Tomlin have a funny thing where he said as long as they don't urinate down their leg or something like that?
Yeah.
So, that's what I was thinking. But so generally you draft a kicker in the 4th round, and which you trade up for in Chad Ryland, like you pretty much assume, like, unless things go off course, he's going to be on the roster. Lance, the one thing that I've sort of left open to possibility is, like, Ryland could kick off and Folk could handle the field goals if Ryland struggles in camp. It's not ideal. I think if you were to ask Coach Dayball, he'd probably tell you, would rather not have, a kickoff specialist than a kicker. But given how special teams hurt the Patriots last year, it's not, to me, it wouldn't be like definitely not, right? Like, you'd prefer it not to be, but I'm leaving that possibility open. Although I think it'll ultimately be Chad Ryland handling both of them, and then Bryce Behringer, the punter, who was the first punter taken out of Michigan, and he's out of Michigan State. I believe he'll be a significant upgrade for them, specific to the punting. The area I'll be watching for is the holder on the field goals, just because I feel like there's almost as much pressure, if not more, on that when you're dealing with another rookie like we talked about at kicker.
When I look at the Patriots, and we're talking about special teams right now, right? And, they brought me in as a reserve linebacker and also a teamer, a core teamer, right? Some people don't know exactly what that is. People think specialists are just punter, kickers, and long snappers, right? But specialists are also guys like Nate Ebner, guys like Matthew Slater, who's going into his 16th year, which is
insane.
Insane. Yeah. And the thing is, people ask me about them, the real football guys. Nobody that doesn't really understand, like, you have to really be ingrained in football to ask me a question about Matthew Slater, right? And I've been asked about Matthew Slater several times. And when I got to New England, this was the first time where I got to a place where the focus was so heavily dependent on one guy that, like, it just made my job so much easier. The first game I played against was the Denver Broncos Sunday Night Football, Peyton Manning, and I had 3 tackles on kickoff. This is when they was actually returning kickoffs back in the day. But that was because I was playing off of Slater. But what I noticed is that core, that Nate Ebner, the Slater group, throw myself in there, and whoever was a teamer for the New England Patriots, they, rocked out for years, almost a decade. I don't really see that nucleus anymore. And we talk about the Giants' lack thereof of a special teams, like a core group of guys that is going to be on punt, making plays on punt return, making plays on kickoff and kick return. Like a Slater. Slater's going to do, he's a 4-core guy. He's showing up all over the field. And I think without that, the Giants, of course, suffered last year. And I think that was one of their low points last year. In New England, going out the way they went against the Bills, with the Bills being the offensive juggernaut they are, the defensive juggernaut they are. But special teams was always the edge that New England had. And Slater's still there, but he's a lot older. What other guys, that they have? No Scotty O. Scotty O was the special teams coordinator when I was there. Joe Judge was the assistant when I was there. I felt like the special teams nucleus for the Patriots was above and beyond every other team. And that's what truly made them, like you said, a complimentary football team. But without that there, I don't know if the Patriots are going to be able to compete in this division. Now, how do you see this? I guess, who do you see as core players adding to that Slater group that because Slater's going to be there. I don't care how old he is. He could be 45 years old. He's going to be the best player on the field at special teams because as he's getting older, he's learning. And he's not maybe as skilled as he once was and as talented, but he has that knowledge. Who else do you see that can add in to that nucleus?
Yeah, Jonathan, I'm going to give you 3 points on this. Number 1, Chris Board. I think you mentioned him. They signed him.
I met Chris Board in Columbia, linebacker.
That's it.
Yes, sir. Okay.
So came up with the Ravens, played last year with the Lions, and Bill Belichick referred to him as the best special teams player that the Patriots played against last year. So they signed him to a fairly lucrative free agent deal. So start with Chris Board. And remember this name, Brendan Schooler. He's a second-year player out of Texas. As a rookie, undrafted last year, he was second on the team in special teams tackles. He absolutely flies, Jonathan. He's going to – I wouldn't be shocked if he's a Pro Bowl player, this year.
Wow.
He actually led the team in special teams tackles last year with 14. Slater had 13. And I did want to point out, you mentioned Joe Judge, and this might be of interest to the listeners here, with the Giants tie-in, obviously. Joe Judge is back working with the special teams here, even though he doesn't have the official title. So you played under him. He was an assistant with Scott O'Brien. I think he's an excellent special teams coach, and I know Giants fans will look back at his head coaching tenure, and that might generate a reaction. But specific to Joe as a special teams coach, I mean, his units have, in my experience, have always rated highly. So I believe his presence is going to be important and has to be part of any conversation we have.
This conversation wouldn't be complete if Jonathan Casillas did not sell himself as a core special teamer going back to his New England days. I'm glad we were able to squeeze that in, Mike, in the conversation, and we can at least look out to some of those other players who could play a prominent role on special teams this season. He is Mike Reiss, ESPN NFL Nation reporter, does a fantastic job covering the Patriots. Mike, it's always great to catch up with you. Really appreciate the time and the insight, and I look forward to doing it again later on this season.
Definitely. Thanks, Lance. Thanks, Jonathan. And I look forward to that game, November 26th, Patriots-Giants. Always great to be in town for that.
You got it. Appreciate it, Mike. A pleasure having you on the program. That is Mike Reiss with us here on Big Blue Kickoff Live. Does a really great job delving into the fine details of the New England Patriots and a lot of great background info that we got out of him. But you bring up an interesting point, Jonathan. I think it's a bit of a transitional year for your former team. We talked about Bill O'Brien taking over as OC, the core on special teams, a rookie punter, a rookie kicker. On offense, does another wide receiver emerge? Do they win the DeAndre Hopkins sweepstakes? I'm not saying that we never have been asking these questions, but it just seems like a lot of questions balled into one in this upcoming campaign.
Yeah, and when Mike Reiss got excited about DeAndre Hopkins, I was like, okay. So that's something that they have on their radar, at least the New England faithful. So maybe he, these guys be knowing something. These Mike Reisses of the world,
sure,
the ESPN reporter, analyst guys, they know stuff because they do their job very well. They do their job very diligently. So I think if they do add DeAndre Hopkins, I think this offense can compete in this division because when you look at the division, I think the Jets are going to take a huge step forward. And, of course, the Bills are the Bills. The Bills have been putting up numbers the last 3 to 4 years, ever since Josh Allen's, I guess, second year in the NFL. And then, of course, Miami with those explosive wide receivers on the outside, and Tua being the deep ball thrower that he is, and those explosive running backs. And, I like Stevenson, Ramondre Stevenson.
Yep.
He's a fantastic running back. I think he's a 3-down running back. He runs hard. I think he can do some things out the backfield, and I think having Bill O'Brien at that offensive coordinator locked in, I thought Mac Jones was a great quarterback.
Oh, he had a great rookie year.
Last year he took a step back, and then, of course, the media likes to put, the highlights on him, talking and yelling back at the OC or, doing all that nonsense. But I definitely take him this year, taking a step forward with Bill O'Brien being there. My question is, who is he going to throw the ball to? And I have a lot of respect for Juju and all the receivers there. But like I said earlier, Mike, there's really no number one there, and Gesicki's good, but he's not no Gronkowski, so where are they going to get that offensive firepower from on the outside or something explosive down the field? Who is that going to come from?
Well, that's why I brought up Thornton, because Thornton was a nice pick. He's got the speed. If he could stay healthy and be productive on the field, that to me is a strong candidate, and then everybody else could be that complementary weapon, including Gesicki. But I have a feeling, Jonathan, that Gesicki, I just think it was the lack of targets in Miami last season. I don't think Mike Gesicki forgot how to play football.
No.
It was just, you look at the big splash you made with Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and it went beyond that.
They get their targets. They get their targets.
Yeah. Whereas he comes to a team like New England, and maybe this is fantastic for him that they don't have a number one wide receiver, and maybe you see, even though you don't look at him as Gronk, and I'm not selling him as Gronk to you, but would it surprise me if Mike Gesicki finishes second in receiving on the Patriots this season? Not at all.
I would agree with that. And this is the thing about Gronk, and I got to give Gronk his praise right now, and the reason why he was one of the best tight ends ever, because Gronk was a true inline tight end who had, the athleticism and the versatility to split outside if they needed to, and they could put him at fullback. He had a lot of different things that he can do. Somebody like Gesicki, somebody like Darren Waller, they're not really true inline tight ends. When they're on the field, something's up. When Gronk's in, he might not get the ball for 3-4 drives, and he's blocking on every single play.
Sure.
That is the difference between a Gronkowski, and I think the Giants actually have a guy on the roster in Daniel Bellinger who fits that Gronk mode. Of course, he's young. Of course, he hasn't done anything what Gronk has done, but an inline tight end, when you go 11 personnel, that one tight end set with 3 receivers and a running back, that's a passing situation. But if you have a great tight end there that can block in line, that is a strong running formation because defensively you have to match up against those wide receivers. And I cursed out Steve Spagnuolo one time because we were here playing against the Patriots, And they were in 11 personnel, which is one tight end, and Gronk was in. And we had the safety in. Oh, man, Craig Dahl.
Yep.
Craig Dahl was basically playing my weak side linebacker position, and I was playing middle linebacker. They didn't let us get out of that. They kept us in dime personnel, and they ran the ball down our throats. That is the presence of a Gronkowski, because he keeps it as a running, threatening situation when he's in. Hunter Henry,
yeah,
Gesicki,
those guys are not known as blockers. Yeah,
you know, so it's not the same. Like, you can't compare anybody to Gronk and what he's done. And these guys, they're more receiving threats, which kind of limits you on offense.
No, I think that's a great point. They also, remember, they brought in Jonnu Smith a year ago, and they traded him to Atlanta this offseason. And he did his wonders for Tennessee, also more known as a receiving tight end. And it's hard to find guys like Gronk. You know, they don't grow on trees where you just pluck them and say, okay, we're going to put them into the mix. It's very difficult. But you bring up an interesting point, just to bring this back to the Giants. I think when Bellinger and Darren Waller are both on the field together and we see some formations like that, you're giving the defense, Jonathan, something to think about. Meaning Bellinger could stay in as a blocker or he can run a route. Now, Waller, who we were actually talking with the Raiders, Las Vegas Review-Journal beat reporter Vinny Bonsignore earlier in the week, and he was talking about in his college days, Waller came from an offense where he was asked to block at Georgia Tech, and things obviously change when you go to the Raiders and so forth, but even though Waller may not be as big of a threat from a blocking standpoint as Bellinger, I think when those two guys are on the field, you have to think they both can run routes, one of them can stay back and block, and even if you're not an overwhelming threat, but you give the defense something to think about, that makes your offense even that much more fluid.
Absolutely. And when they brought Waller into the New York Giants, I was like, wow, this is going to be an explosive and very diversified type of offense, you know, because you have a Waller in. He may not be that physical presence as a Daniel Bellinger or a Gronkowski, of course, but because he has the threat to release, you play him differently. Like when you're lined up, let's say that outside linebacker type guy and that loose nine, kind of like over the tight end or man-to-man on the tight end, you have to honor the release. You have to honor. So you play a little bit softer against a Darren Waller because you understand that if he beats you off the line,
you're dead.
You're done.
Yeah, it's
you're
over.
done. So adding Waller to this group with, I think, a stud tight end in Daniel Bellinger. I think he's a stud. I think he's a huge human being who's very strong at the point of attack. You know, and he's also has that receiving threat. Now, Darren Waller, not too much of a blocking threat in the run game, especially in line. But when you have both of them in the game and he splits out, he's going to be the best blocking receiver on the team. When you're doing things down the field, they're going to play him like a receiver, but he can block better than every receiver on the team. That's going to be the advantage the Giants have when Waller's on the field. They're going to play him like you have to.
Yeah, you have to respect him.
When Bellinger and Waller's in, that's 12 personnel with two tight ends. You got to treat him like it's 11 because you got to honor Waller as a wide receiver and you got to play him accordingly. You can't have all linebackers out there, you know, and at least that's my approach without seeing this offense for the first time.
No, and I would agree with you.
That's my approach to it, right? Yeah. And then you get Waller on the outside, treat him as a wide receiver. Now he's the best blocker. He's huge, 6'5", 6'6". He's a huge human being. He don't look too big, but he's solid. He's going to be able to put his hands on these DBs and these cornerbacks and some of these linebackers on the outside, and that's what I think is going to take our offense to the next level.
Few reminders before we open up the phone lines here on Big Blue Kickoff Live, 201-939-4513. Giants Huddle Podcast, you could check that out on your favorite podcast platform, or you can head to giants.com/podcast. We are inching closer to the 2023 NFL season. The schedule is officially out. Single game tickets are on sale now. Don't miss the Giants at MetLife Stadium this season. Visit giants.com/tickets to secure your seat. And who knows, you may want to check in on the Week 12 matchup that we were just previewing between the Giants and the Patriots. Giants fans, you can then take your fandom to the next level with a season ticket membership. Then you don't have to worry about just Week 12. You can worry about the 7 other home games this season. You can stay connected to the club all year round, not just on game days. Memberships are now available for the 2023 season. To learn more about all the exclusive member benefits, visit giants.com/tickets. Limited inventory is available. And the Giants official connected TV streaming app, it's Giants TV. It brings you original video content, game highlights on demand, and direct to Big Blue fans. Giants TV, it's free. It's on Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire TV, TV as well as the Giants mobile app. All right, let's open up the phone lines as we move forward here on Thursday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live. We check in with Scott in New Mexico joining us here. What's happening, Scott?
Hey, guys. How you doing today?
Doing all right. What's on your mind?
Good. Interesting statistic I was looking at in Sports Illustrated. This I'm not quite sure how to interpret it, so maybe you can help me. The Giants, according to them, ranked 31st in the league, only ahead of the Panthers, in yards passing. And the way they broke it down is there was the Giants had 33.27 intended air yards on all pass attempts, whether completed or incompleted. And that ranked them 31st. I was curious how they got to that range. Do they do an aggregate number and then decide this is where they are? Because doesn't bode well. And I know the Giants, as a team, I think they threw for less than 200 yards a game. So I have a couple of questions. I know Waller is going to be the center of attention, but also he's going to be the center of attention of all the defenses that the Giants are going to come up against. They're not stupid. They're going to realize he's the key. So he's going to be double covered, maybe even triple covered a couple of times. Who has to step up? And one other statistic that's interesting, Kansas City led the league with 272 first downs from receptions. I was curious if you knew how many first downs the Giants got from their receptions. I know it's a couple of different questions, but I was hoping to get them maybe answered in a row if you can do that.
All right, Scott. Well, in terms of the number that you were referring to, my guess is, without looking at it, is I guess they're taking an average of, and Jonathan, maybe you know this from your days playing, if you may have heard of the statistic, about the depth of the pass, whether it's complete or not, and they're looking at the teams that throw the farthest down the field versus ones that rely more on shorter passes. And, I mean, let's face it, the Giants were not electric. They did not have a lot of explosive plays. So, Scott, to answer your question, it doesn't surprise me that the Giants are not ranked very high in terms of deep passes, depth, however you want to label it, given the fact that they did not convert, whether it was short passes or long passes, in terms of getting those 20-plus yard completions last season.
Yeah, I think the attempts down the field were down drastically, especially from Daniel Jones' first 4 years in the NFL. And look, I think 3 years. Look, the offensive line, I think, was, I guess, the reason maybe I would say that,
yeah, sure,
that the offense was more dink and dunk, more in that under 20-yard range, 10 to 20. And honestly, I liked it there because I think Daniel Jones was very accurate there. I think between the hashes, between the numbers and between the hashes, those were Daniel Jones's best throws. And I don't look at this offense as being limited explosively. I just think it was limited in general. Right? And they did the best of what the roster had, what the offense had out there. Now I look at an upgrade and I look at Evan Neal being better. I look at the offensive line being better. I look at the outside guys being a little bit more explosive. Isaiah Hodgins being a returner, Starwood. But you got guys like Paris Campbell. You got guys like Darren Waller who's going to make this offense stretch down the field further if the offensive line can protect.
Right.
Because I think Daboll, he's not going to change and do something different if the offensive line is not better. The offensive line has to be better and protect Daniel Jones so you have a little bit more time to go downfield and create that explosive offense which the Giants lacked last year.
Now, I agree.
Yeah, as far as your point about the Kansas City Chiefs, what was the number you had? I just want to look at what I'm looking at.
272 first downs from receptions.
Okay, so in perspective of that, the Giants were at $170. So they were on the opposite end of the spectrum. I'll look exactly where the Giants were because 272 was number one with Kansas City. So the Giants wound up, I mean, they weren't in the bottom 5, but they were in the bottom 10 of the NFL. They were just ahead of the Broncos, who were at $166.
Okay. So just as a sequence question, in other words, who has to, if what I said is accurate and people are going to double team Waller, which they're going to do, who are the receivers that you think are going to step up? Is it Hodgins? Is it Slayton? Or as Jonathan mentioned earlier, Paris Campbell? Do they need to do a more? If Jonathan's point is accurate and the offensive line is more formidable than they were last year, then do they have enough time to get to the receivers, and which receivers are the ones you think the Giants will put out there? Because I'm assuming that Wan'Dale Robinson and Sterling Shepard will probably not start right away. I'm making that assumption. I don't know if it's true or not.
No, I mean, Robinson could be in the mix. I mean, Shepard is probably more of a question because of the injury he's coming off.
Right.
I mean, I understand Robinson tore his ACL too, but I would think if Robinson's healthy, I don't think they're going to necessarily hold him back. I think they're excited about what he could do based on that Lions game last year.
Yeah, I think when the season starts, I expect Paris Campbell
and Scott,
to be
appreciate
a guy.
the phone call.
Thank you.
Yep.
I expect Paris Campbell to be a guy that gets those deep targets, and Jalen Hyatt as well. Look, that's a kid that you drafted him that early because he presented that threat in college. You know, we watched the game against what he did against Alabama. He was electric. He was explosive, right? So the Giants, they get him early in the year. They're going to see what he did in preseason. And then when the season starts, you're going to put your best guys out there. And it may not be Wan'Dale early, it may not be Sterling early. And I say early. Sure. But at the end of the season, I think Wan'Dale's going to be right there as one of those guys. That's those catch and run threats, those Victor Cruzes of the world. You know, that guy that you can get the ball anywhere to, which he showed very short glimpses of it last year when he was healthy. He showed that they can give him the ball in different ways, and he's that explosive threat to get upfield and make plays all over. So it can be a guy that can get the handoff from the backfield, a jet sweep, a quick screen, even a downfield route, because I think he possesses that athletic ability. And at the season's end, I expect him to be one of the more explosive receivers in the division.
Yeah, I'm very high on Wan'Dale Robinson. I'm with you, Jonathan. I've said it multiple times. I also, when you ask about a receiver stepping up, I look at the receiver that's not dependent on the home run ball.
Right.
Paris Campbell and Jalen Hyatt are going to be dependent on not just whether or not they catch the ball, the at-bats, right? I'll use the baseball analogy, opportunities down the field. I'm not saying that the Giants are not going to look to test it out.
And they didn't come by a lot last year.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, that's all volume-based opportunities. Isaiah Hodgins and Wan'Dale Robinson, they're not reliant on the home run. Hodgins also, we did not see a full season of him. We only saw half a season.
And now let's say he takes a big step forward.
But I think that's reasonable.
Yep.
That expectation is reasonable. If you take Isaiah and you average it out over the course of the year, he should be an insurance policy over the middle of the field, be able to move those chains. Wan'Dale Robinson, is he going to do what he did against the Lions, 100 yards every single week? I think that may be getting it too ahead of ourselves.
Yeah.
But he runs those style of routes, Jonathan, where if Daniel dumps it off to him, he's not expecting to run 40 yards down the field to make the catch. He maybe can make a 10-yard catch and then gain 5 yards after the catch, and there's a 15-yard reception. So Hodgins and Robinson, I think, are realistic targets to say if they can be consistent, that would help the offense more so than you hoping Paris Campbell and Jalen Hyatt game to game are going to haul in 3 or 4 catches for 30 yards apiece.
Yep. No, I agree. But that adds that element to the offense that lacked last year.
And they need that element, 100%.
If they can do it. So
100%.
Look, I'm fully agreeing with you. I think Isaiah Hodgins is probably the best all-around receiver that the Giants have right now, especially with the unhealthy Wan'Dale coming back, a Sterling Shepard coming back off of an injury. And I look at to see him improving, because once you have a year like that, where you come in and you actually play, because he didn't really play too much before last year.
No, he did not. Sure.
When you actually play and you realize, I can play at this level. Not only I can play at this level, I can ball. He went against Patrick Peterson and caught a touchdown on him. He caught passes on one of the best cornerbacks in the last 10 years. That gives you confidence. That gives you an approach to the offseason, and you're working with the Odell Beckham Jr.'s of the world. Like, you're working with guys because now you feel like you're a guy now. And I expect him to take a big step forward this year. And when the season starts off and maybe Wan'Dale's not getting those reps as he was, and Sterling might even be, he might be on IR or a PUP list, right? I expect Isaiah to be a guy early. I expect him to get targets early, and I expect when this offense comes out and it's third down, if Waller's double team, which they should double team him, I think Isaiah Hodgins would be a viable option on third down. And in the red zone.
And the third player that we didn't bring up that I think is worth mentioning, and this to me is just more of he and Daniel have very good chemistry and came up together. Mm-hmm. Correct. You can't forget about Darius.
Forget about him. Yep.
Now, we don't know how the roles are going to play out because, once again, I think it's one of the deepest positions battles on this roster. But assuming all of these players we mentioned are on the roster, Darius, if he's in the mix, Daniel's going to lean on him. He's proven to do that over the last few years. And Darius is also not the type of wide receiver, Jonathan, that, once again, is relying on deep down the field opportunities. He's made some big splash plays, but Darius will run some of those intermediate routes that enables him to be effective. So those are the three that I would focus on more so than anybody else.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with you. But at year's end, what we saw last year from Wan'Dale, that was enough for me to be like, okay, he's a guy. Let's just hope, knock on wood, he can come back and be as explosive as he once was, if not a step off, because you never know how guys come back from these injuries.
Bingo.
And every time somebody gets hurt, it makes me cringe, and I just hurt because you just never know how they're going to come back. And you get a guy like Sterling, who I think, look, when I was here in New York, I loved Odell, and I used to talk crap to the teams that I played for, like the Buccaneers. I remember it was Jonathan Banks. We were in the end zone. I said, hey, bro, what y'all got to do against 13 today? What y'all doing today? He was like, I'm not going to tell you. I said, bro, you better have something special because that boy different. And that was because, of course, Odell was like that. But Sterling, at that position, that slot receiver, that inside possession type of receiver, even being a Z, on the same side as the thing and being opposite Odell, Sterling was a guy. He was a guy. And then, injuries happened over the years. And now it's like, hopefully he can make the roster, which is sad to say, but
it's
that's
a fair
where it's
statement
at.
To be made.
That's where it's at right now, and when I look at this offensive firepower, and you've ranked them number one for position groups for the Giants.
Correct.
I like the talent in that room, and I love that Sterling's the leader. I love that. And Sterling may not be the playmaker leader, on the field as he once was when he was younger in his career and a lot healthier, but he's going to be a guy to get these guys going. And when you have a guy like that in that room, I think it raises the level of play. And it may not even be from his play, but just for him showing up, being a cheerleader like he was last year and giving them guys energy. That's the real thing. And I think that group is a great group of guys. I don't know them personally. I know some of them. We met Isaiah Hodgins. I did an interview with him not too long ago. But I expect that room, starting with Isaiah Hodgins, to take a big step forward.
One last thing I just want to throw out, because I just brought up that Lions game. I was looking at the calendar. Wan'Dale Robinson suffered the injury week 11, so it goes back to what you were talking about. And once again, we don't know anything about timeline and timetable because the spring you can't base anything on. Most of these guys are working on the side. I think the beginning of training camp is going to give us a better indication, especially if somebody starts on PUP. But like you said, Jonathan, sometimes that following season, and when a player the previous year gets hurt more than beyond the midway point, you got to maybe keep some expectations realistic that it could take the first half of the season before they start to feel what they did prior to the injury last year.
And even if they're playing early, like even if he doesn't start on PUP list and he starts in the beginning of the season, he hasn't ran too many routes against guys healthy at that point. It'd be like maybe double digits at that point. He hasn't had hundreds of reps. And in order for you to get back to the guy that he once was, you got to have hundreds of reps. You got to go out there and do it. So I expect him to maybe be a little bit slower in productivity this year, because I think last year, as soon as he was on the field, you noticed that, oh, this guy's explosive. This guy can be that guy to get that hard-fought first down when he has the ball in the bubble screen and gets hit at the line of scrimmage. He showed that he can do it. I expect it to be a little bit slower. But the healthy Saquon there, and that running back trio that the Giants have, Daniel Bellinger, Darren Waller, Isaiah Hodgins, a guy who I felt like at the end of last year was very reliable. I expect in the beginning of the season to rely heavily on those guys. That's what I think the offense is going to be.
Speaking of the ebbs and flows of a season, I think people forget, not only did Wan'Dale Robinson tear his ACL in Week 11, he suffered a knee injury in the opener and missed some time. So, to your point, there wasn't a high volume of snaps against top-line defenders last season. It's almost as if walking into this year is the continuation of his rookie year, because you got to look at it from that standpoint. Not a lot of logged snaps. Let's head back to the phone lines, and we bring in, oh boy, this should make things interesting, Wilson in Roxbury. What's happening, Wilson? What do you got for us?
Jonathan, Lance, dímelo!
Dímelo, papi.
Hey, Lance, listen real quick, man. Before you should see your face when you realize that I'm on the phone. I mean, God, it's priceless.
Yeah. Well, I have enough reps, unlike Wan'Dale Robinson. So experience benefits me. I know what I'm walking into. So let us hear. What is the latest media report that you digested and you've been thinking about while you've been on hold that we need to now analyze for the next 20 minutes? Yes.
Okay, listen. You hate when I say that, when I do this, Lance, but it's the middle of July. But listen, if all the rumors are true about what's going on with Saquon, he's really pushing the envelope, man. If the Giants have a 2-year, $13 million deal, $13 million per year deal, I mean, I don't know. Listen, Lance, you say that they love Saquon. I love Saquon, but I can love you, and if you're gonna disrupt my house, I love you outside my house. Because listen, real quick, Lance, listen. Lance,
I'm listening. Look,
he's listening. He can hear you in those things.
No, Jonathan, listen. Miles Sanders, right? He signed, I think it was an annual salary of less than $7 million.
Yeah, it was just over 6. Correct.
All right. Saquon, as much as I love him, he's not $5 million better than Miles Sanders. He's not, man. So I don't know what's going on, but I hope he knows what he's doing. All I'm saying is I hope Saquon knows what he's doing. He already made a mistake last time by listening to his agent and not signing the extension back then. I hope because he doesn't want to get the Giants upset, man, because the Giants got something good going, and they don't need any headaches. And I guess I'll let you go. I'll let you guys go with that.
Well, speaking of relieving headaches, yes, well, we're very thankful, Wilson. We'll leave you on that note. Appreciate the phone call. I don't know how many times I need to go over this, and you know the business better than anybody, having been a former player. Saquon, first of all, he's knocking on the door of this deadline, Jonathan. And we talk about this
coming up really soon.
Monday, July 17th,
days,
at 4 p.m. Eastern. Deadlines make deals. That's number one.
Yeah.
And any report that you may read, you have to understand, him and his representatives, they'll look for leverage any way they can get it, right? So sometimes you have things being thrown out, and it's part of the negotiating process. That doesn't mean that it's a threat that will come to fruition or whatever it may be. Both sides are trying to find the middle ground, and this usually comes to the forefront around this time when we're a few days away. But as far as, and I've said this time and time again, from a business perspective, Jonathan, Saquon knows the tag is guaranteed $10 million. So you can understand him and his representatives are thinking about what the tag would be next year if he was tagged again. And the guaranteed money is far more important than any average annual salary over the next 4 or 5 years that you could throw his way. And I think that gets missed in this conversation. It's not the average annual salary. It's the security that comes with the guaranteed money and what he could potentially make if he were to be franchise tagged 2 years in a row.
And you said it, the word is security. That is what Saquon is looking for. And the Giants have security with the franchise tag on him. That's the Giants' security.
Yep.
They got this guy, a back. You get him for cheaper, and you got him locked in. He can't go nowhere.
Yeah, because he can't negotiate with anybody
for
else.
$10 million. And even Saquon said it. I heard an interview where he said the Giants have the leverage. He said it. He understands what's going on. And me and Paul, we went back and forth with this, and Paul's like, "There's no way he's sitting out." You know, and I don't think there's no way. I think as of right now, I'm gonna go with there's a 2% chance that he'll sit out, but it's not zero. It's not zero. I think if they don't get a deal done by Monday, is it Monday or Tuesday? Monday?
Yeah.
If they don't get a deal done by Monday, I think Saquon's going to do the franchise tag. And look, I want Saquon to sign the franchise tag because he's going to feel slighted, and we want him to feel slighted. We want him to run angry this year. That's what we want.
Well, but here's the thing. You know, Jonathan, once he signs the tag, he has to show up.
Oh, yeah.
So,
no, but he's still going to play on that tag like, these guys don't respect me.
No, of course. Yeah,
the only way
to
do that, because he's not a bad character guy.
Yeah.
He's a locker room guy. The only way you can do that and show that you're upset, you run that way.
Of course, yeah.
You run that way. You demand the carries, and you run aggressively. You run hard, and you feel like you got that chip on your shoulder, even though you're making $10 million this year, but you feel that way, and that's what I want from Saquon. I'd rather him not get the deal this year and play for a deal next year, because that's what's going to happen. He's going to be playing for his deal, and we want a hungry, angry Saquon running that ball, especially when we go down to 95.
Well, there you go. Well, he'll be in a contract year, no matter how you want to spin it.
Yep.
So, I mean, that's all the motivation you need in the world. But I'm with Paul. I don't see him sitting out because, once again, I just look at it's not Saquon, Jonathan. It's Le'Veon Bell. I don't see anyone following his path.
Yep.
Because Bell even came out publicly and admitted if he could go back and do it again, he would have never sat out an entire season.
You can't do that, especially at that position.
Well, and also you'll never get that money back.
Absolutely.
You're never going to make that $10 million back.
You're older, meaning you're less valuable, especially that position. 1 year, even if you're not playing, 1 year, if you go from 26 to 27, is that 26 to 27? That's like adding 3 years, 4 years to a regular businessman or a product or whatever it is. Because that's what we are. We're products, we're products. That's what we are.
Mean, it's the callous way of looking at it, but
the only thing that gets better with age is wine. That's it.
Not running back.
Saquon is not getting better next year with the year, whether he's playing or not. He's just a little bit older. And at that position, a 26-year-old running back is old. At least he's middle-aged, right? Like we got Ezekiel Elliott. How old is he? 31 maybe?
In that same
He's
ballpark.
old. He's really old. He's been in the league
I don't even know if he's that old because
15?
he was drafted in 2016, so he was 2 years ahead of Saquon. But remember, everybody doesn't play an even amount of college years.
He's old.
He's 27.
Right, and he's old.
Well, of course. And look, the Cowboys have yet to bring him back.
I don't call him old, but he's old.
No, in running back
he's old.
conversation.
He's played so many years. He has so many touches.
No, that's fair.
So many yards.
Yep.
And at 27, Ezekiel Elliott is an old running back. So that's to say Saquon cannot sit out a year because when he comes back, he is the old running back with a year on the shelf.
Sure, because Le'Veon, the thought process was, well, you'll save the body from wear and tear. And then look at what opportunity came about after he returned. Not much, and clearly the production fell off. So there's not a big pro at all that you can spin by sitting out.
I don't see it happening either, but I just don't think it's not going to happen like at all. Like there's no way possible. I think there's a little bit of possibility in there because of the human being that Saquon is. I think he feels slighted, and I think he feels like he's not respected. And I'm not saying he's going to sit out. I just feel like it's not a no. I don't think it's, like I said, I think it's 2% chance that he'll possibly sit out.
So there you go. The 2% is the over-under. I'm surprised Wilson didn't set the parameters for that. You're now taking his job.
It's not big, but I just don't think it's zero like Paul does. Paul thinks it's zero. I don't think it's zero. I think there's something in there that Saquon's like, bruh, I might. Like I'm considering it, at least a little bit. Hopefully not. We all want him to play.
July 17th, Monday, will be the deadline. That will be our next program on Big Blue Kickoff Live after a Friday program tomorrow. See, that was a little bit of a teaser. I got people at the edge of the seat. They were worried. There was going to be no show. No, there will be a show on Friday, but it's a tape program. So we won't be taking any phone calls, but we will continue our opponent preview, and that will be put up on the website and our podcast platforms at 12:30 p.m. Eastern on Friday, so stay tuned for that. A reminder that today's program is, of course, part of the Giants platforms everywhere and Giants.com/podcasts. For Jonathan Casillas, I'm Lance Medow. Stay locked to Giants.com for all the latest, and we'll speak to you on Friday right here on Big Blue Kickoff Live. Have a good one.